The Nintendo Switch 2 is the long-awaited follow-up to the massively successful Nintendo Switch. It features more power, more screen, and more money required to purchase it. Now before we give this thing a fair first impressions, we're gonna have to unbox it first. This is gonna be the best moment of my life. Not even like when my child is born or anything, just like opening the Switch 2. So I guess first off, here are the Joy-Con 2. We have our left Joy-Con 2, which is the blue one. And we also have our right Joy-Con 2, which is the red one. And then now we can also just take a look at the system itself. Here's our Nintendo Switch 2. This is where all of the power comes from. Underneath this top layer, we have my Mario Kart World code. On the back, it shows you how to download said code. We have some health and safety information. And we also get an HDMI cable. This is the new HDMI cable that is faster than the original, so this is what allows us to get all that 4K 60 frames per second performance. And then we also get our Joy-Con 2 wrist straps here. This is the right one in red, and this is the left one in blue. But that's everything on our top layer here. On the bottom here we have, this is our Joy-Con 2 grip. Important to note that this is just a regular grip, this isn't a charging grip. We also have our AC adapter. Very important. Oh, wow, I actually forgot about this. They actually did like a regular USB-C cable situation. So the actual AC adapter is separate from the USB-C cable, because then that means you can just get different USB-C cables. So here's our Nintendo branded USB-C cable for the Switch 2. And finally, we have the big boy Nintendo Switch 2 dock. Wowee. This one feels a lot more like substantial. It's obviously bigger because of the Switch 2 being bigger. Wow. That's our Switch 2, everybody. Now, as the saying goes, always judge a book by its cover. So let's take a look at the outside of the Nintendo Switch 2. To the uninitiated, this may just look like another Nintendo Switch. And they're not totally wrong. The Nintendo Switch 2 pretty much does exactly as the name suggests. It takes everything you love about the Switch and 2's it. But I mean that in the best way possible. Upon first putting my hands on this thing, I was taken aback by just how much better it feels than the original Nintendo Switch. Don't get me wrong, the Nintendo Switch did a great job in achieving what it set out to do, which was to create a home console on the go type of experience. But there was always this underlying issue of everything feeling a bit plasticky, I guess. The Joy-Con felt like tiny little baby toys, the system itself was prone to wear and tear, and everything just kind of had a bit of creakiness to it, especially as the years went on. Obviously, we have yet to see how the Nintendo Switch 2 will hold up in the future, but I do think that this system makes a much better first impression, which, as we all know, means everything. The entire package, including the Joy-Con 2, the system itself, and even the dock, all have a more rugged feel to it, making it feel much cleaner, sleeker, and modern. I feel like Nintendo has this reputation of making video game consoles for kids, but this may just be the first time when Nintendo's system feels like an actual tech product. While nothing in life is perfect, I will say that the Nintendo Switch 2 gets pretty close to perfecting the original Nintendo Switch design. Now, as we all know, bigger is better. So the Nintendo Switch 2 features a 7.9-inch display compared to the 6.2-inch display on the original. And that extra 1.7 inches makes a pretty big difference. Playing in handheld mode on the Switch 2 feels like a whole new experience compared to the original. It makes it way easier to see what is going on in your games, especially when the games feature tiny objects that are way off in the distance. However, despite the larger size, the Nintendo Switch 2 keeps the same thickness as the original, coming in at 13.9 millimeters. And I honestly feel like the size can have its pros and cons. On one hand, it's pretty incredible that the Switch 2 isn't a chunky monkey of a portable video game system. That's one of my biggest gripes with the form factor of, say, the Asus ROG Ally. And with the device being so thin, it's also able to be not ridiculously heavy. Don't get me wrong, there is some noticeable heft, but despite its significant size increase, it's not terrible enough to make it feel like I physically can't bring myself to play this in handheld. On the other hand, some of the cons of the larger size of the Switch 2 include it does make it a little bit less convenient to bring portably. This may just be like a personal preference type of thing. It's like how you can have a plus-sized phone or a standard-sized phone. But I do feel like the Switch 2 is kind of just on the edge of being a bit too big. Meanwhile, with the larger size of the system, you would expect that they would be able to have a larger battery inside. And maybe the battery is larger, but the battery life on the Switch 2 hasn't been the greatest. And there have been countless comparisons and, lots of memes about it, obviously. It is a bit of a bummer that the battery life does take a noticeable hit, whether it's due to its larger size or, the more powerful system itself. It's unfortunate that we get a larger system, but a lower battery life. As for the actual quality of the screen, the Nintendo Switch 2 now features a 1080p display compared to the 720p display of the original. This makes your games look much cleaner on the Nintendo Switch 2, especially the games that natively support 1080p in handheld mode. But not only does the resolution get a bump, but the Switch 2's display also supports up to 120 frames per second, meaning that supported games will look buttery smooth on the Switch 2's screen. Plus, the LCD display on the Switch 2 features HDR support. This allows games to look incredibly vivid with higher contrast between light and dark areas. Now, this is technically a step down from the higher-end Nintendo Switch OLED model, which features an OLED display, offering true blacks and brighter colors for the most vibrant images. I personally haven't been able to experience the Nintendo Switch OLED in person, but from what I've heard, HDR on the Switch 2 screen mostly makes up for the fact that it's still an LCD display. Sure, you might not get like the truest blacks or the highest contrast on this screen, but if you're like me and you don't play your Nintendo Switch in handheld too often, the screen is definitely more than sufficient. Also, I imagine if Nintendo were to have included an OLED display on the Switch 2, the price of the system would skyrocket and people's reactions would also skyrocket, probably 5 million times worse than it already has been with the Switch 2's price. It might even be the start of World War III. Now, taking a look around the Nintendo Switch 2, you'll notice that there have been a bunch of small miscellaneous changes made throughout. First off, we get the addition of a second USB-C port, now on the top of the device, because a big annoyance with the original Nintendo Switch was that its single USB-C charging port was on the bottom of the system. This meant that if you were playing in handheld mode and wanted to charge your Switch, you were just kind of screwed, or you would have to buy some kind of separate charging stand accessory. Now, charging the Switch 2 in handheld mode is easy as just plugging the cable into the top USB-C port. Plus, this USB-C port also allows certain USB-C accessories to be used with the Switch 2. The main one being a USB-C camera for the new social features, both in TV mode and handheld mode. Speaking of handheld mode, the Nintendo Switch 2 also features a new and improved kickstand. This U-shaped kickstand spans the length of the back of the system and can be bent fully outward for many viewing angles. This is a huge step up from the original Nintendo Switch's tiny plastic kickstand that would snap off if you even just looked at it funny. So being able to play your Nintendo Switch 2 in tabletop mode is so much more easy and convenient. But how about these things on the sides of the screen? The Joy-Con 2, once again as the name would suggest, is a nice upgrade from the original. There are quite a few similarities. The face buttons and triggers feel pretty familiar if you're used to the Joy-Con. They're clicky, low-profile buttons with not much travel, which I guess makes sense considering the portable nature of the Switch 2. However, we also see many differences that improve the overall experience of using the Joy-Con 2. First and foremost, with the size increase of the Switch 2 system itself, it means that we also see a very welcomed size increase of the Joy-Con 2. They fit way more comfortably in your hands compared to the tiny original Joy-Con that were bound to make your hands cramp up. And with the larger overall size of the Joy-Con 2 comes the larger control sticks. Once again, a huge upgrade from the original Joy-Con's tiny little control sticks. Those ones were so small, stiff, and didn't really allow for much travel at all. Now, with the Joy-Con 2, these control sticks feel so much better to use. They are way smoother and allow for a much wider range of movement. While not as freely moving as a standard controller, I would say that these control sticks come pretty darn close. Now, if we detach the Joy-Con 2 from the Switch 2 system, you'll find the new massive SL and SR buttons. On the original Joy-Con, the SL and SR buttons were these tiny little tic-tacs which required you to dig your finger into the controller just to press. But the Joy-Con 2's SL and SR buttons are like, bam, here they are, ready to be pressed. Meanwhile, in actual use, the Joy-Con 2 include a lot of the features that we know and love. We get an updated version of HD Rumble, aptly called HD Rumble 2, NFC support for Amiibo, and motion control. But we also get some brand new features as well. First off, the Joy-Con 2 feature new mouse controls. This means that you can take your Joy-Con 2 and use them on its side like a regular computer mouse. To be honest, I was quite skeptical about this feature, but after trying it out a bit, I was actually pleasantly surprised that it works quite well. You can actually use mouse controls on the Switch 2 home screen just by putting the Joy-Con 2 on its side and pressing the L or R buttons. I've tried out using the mouse controls on a bunch of different surfaces, including my lap, my arm, and even my belly. And surprisingly, I don't think I noticed a single instance in which the cursor jumped around or was misread. Now, I will say I'm still a bit skeptical about how games will implement mouse controls going into the future. So far, we've seen mini games that use mouse controls, shooter games that allow you to aim with mouse controls, and more recently, Nintendo revealed the new sculpting mode in Donkey Kong Bonanza. But I do worry about whether or not this feature will end up being forgotten about as time goes on, similar to the IR camera on the original Joy-Con. Maybe I'm just not creative enough, but the only real use case that I could come up with for intuitive mouse controls was Super Mario Maker, being able to create levels using mouse controls rather than buttons. Feel free to share your craziest Joy-Con 2 mouse control ideas in the comments. And hey, have you heard of this new revolutionary feature called magnets? The Nintendo Switch 2 ditches the old rail mechanism that was used to attach the Joy-Con, and now the Joy-Con 2 just use magnets to connect. And so far, I can say that it does honestly feel a bit magical just how these magnets work. Pretty much all you have to do is bring your Joy-Con 2 next to your Nintendo Switch 2 system, and then they just pop in. Now, I guess we'll just have to wait and see how these magnets hold up. I do worry about the strength of the magnets degrading over time, but for now, I think the Joy-Con 2 just work really well with this new magnet system. I do think it's funny because there are quite a few videos out there of people claiming that, the magnets don't work because they rip off the Joy-Con from their Switch. But a lot of the videos I've seen, it's like people, you can see literally their hands shaking as they're trying to get the Joy-Con off, and then they're like, see, they're basically just trying to brag about how strong they are, I guess. At least in my, everyday, just normal use cases, I've found the magnet system to work really well with the Joy-Con 2 and the Nintendo Switch 2. And it's also really cool because Nintendo has incorporated magnets into a lot of the Joy-Con 2 accessories. Whether it's the Joy-Con 2 grip that comes with your Nintendo Switch 2 system, the Joy-Con 2 charging grips, even the Joy-Con 2 wheels. They all use this new magnet system, which I think is really cool, just to see how that works with the Joy-Con 2 controllers. But I've been yapping so much about the Switch 2 that I almost forgot. This thing can play games too. And with the Nintendo Switch 2, there are 3 types of games that you'll be able to play on the system. First, the Nintendo Switch 2 can play a huge majority of original Switch games. Nintendo has a whole PDF file on their website going through which games work on Switch 2, which games are playable with issues in certain parts of the game, which games have issues during startup, and which games are just not compatible with Switch 2. Based on my experimenting with playing Nintendo Switch games, games on Switch 2, I found that these original Switch games now have some new life breathed into them thanks to the new hardware. With games like Mario Kart 8 Deluxe or even just Tetris 99, I've noticed that the games just look overall better on the Switch 2, thanks to the Nintendo Switch 2 upscaling these games to output in 4K resolution. And although I don't know all of the science behind it, I'm no scientist, from what I understand, like, they are able to fully uncap the hardware limitations of the previous Nintendo Switch, and so even with games that aren't officially given updates to be compatible with Switch 2, they still are able to use the full power of the Nintendo Switch 2, making them look better and even run better on the Switch 2. Plus, with the new 1080p display on the Switch 2 compared to the 720p display on the original Switch, it's obviously going to look better on the new higher res display. But we also have Nintendo Switch 2 Edition games. These are original Nintendo Switch games that have been given a little extra boost to provide the best experience exclusively on Switch 2. The two Nintendo Switch 2 Edition games that I've been able to look at so far are The Legend of Zelda Breath of the Wild Nintendo Switch 2 Edition and The Legend of Zelda Tears of the Kingdom Nintendo Switch 2 Edition. Both Breath of the Wild and Tears of the Kingdom have been upgraded to include improved frame rates, resolution, and even HDR support. You get faster load times and support for the Zelda Notes service, which is available in the Nintendo Switch app on your smartphone. These are basically like supplementary material that you can be using alongside the game as you play it. Whether it's opening up the map and using it like a GPS, scanning QR codes for custom-made vehicles in Tears of the Kingdom, or even fully voice-acted journal entries. I've been playing both Breath of the Wild and Tears of the Kingdom now in 4K 60 frames per second. I'm just blown away by how amazing these games now look running on the Switch 2. For me, Breath of the Wild in particular, I think runs just perfectly on the Nintendo Switch 2. It fixes a lot of the like sharp and choppy looking graphics of the original. The frame rate is like buttery smooth now, whereas on the original Switch you would sometimes get some stuttering every so often. And just the visuals in general look so much better running on the Switch 2. As I think many reviewers have put it, Breath of the Wild on Switch 2 feels like how the game was meant to be played. It's just so smooth, so beautiful, and the definitive way to play Breath of the Wild in my opinion. It actually feels like you're kind of playing a whole new game again. And we have more Nintendo Switch 2 Edition games coming in the future, including Super Mario Party Jamboree, Kirby and the Forgotten Land, Metroid Prime 4 Beyond, and Pokemon Legends ZA. And of course, the third type of game we have here are the Nintendo Switch 2 exclusive games. I'll be covering Switch 2 games in greater detail in my future videos, so be sure you're subscribed to my channel. But at the time of its release, I think the Nintendo Switch 2's definitive launch title has to be Mario Kart World. This game feels like the perfect game to launch the Switch 2 with. You get this giant interconnected world in which you could actually just drive all over the place. You can literally drive from course to course, even finding some little secrets along the way, and it runs really well up to 4K 60 frames per second. Unfortunately, there was the misconception that this game runs at 120 frames per second, but hey, the game still looks incredibly beautiful. The art style feels totally revamped and totally new compared to Mario Kart 8 Deluxe. The characters just have so much life to them and are so expressive. All of the textures and colors really pop running on the Switch 2. And hey, besides looking at the game, we can also just play the game. As the developers stated in their interview, they felt like they perfected Mario Kart with Mario Kart 8 Deluxe, so they pretty much just went back and started from scratch. We get the Mario Kart racing as we know and love. The battle mode is honestly a little bit stripped down compared to Mario Kart 8 Deluxe, but you also get a brand new mode called Knockout Tour, which is basically a survival mode in which every lap you have to place a certain ranking or else you're booted out of the game. It makes for a really fun, hectic, and sometimes even stressful type of game. Once again, I will be sharing my full thoughts on Mario Kart World in a future video, so make sure you're subscribed to my channel. Let me know in the comments what you guys think about the Nintendo Switch 2 so far. But for now, thank you for watching. Thank you so much to all of our members. My name is Chase, and I will see you guys again soon. Bye.